The Assassin's Redemption. Shadow's Order. The city of Veridon was a festering wound upon the earth, a place where the very stones seemed to weep with a century of grime and forgotten hopes. Its underbelly, the Warrens, was Sayra's kingdom. Here the air was a thick broth of rotting fish, cheap ale, and the ever-present tang of human misery. She moved through the labyrinthine alleys not as a citizen, but as a predator, a ghost of gristle and sharp edges. Her world was one of instinct. Find food, avoid the city watch, sleep with one eye open and a shiv clutched in her fist. She knew no ballads, prayed to no gods, and trusted no one. Her heart was a feral, caged thing, beating a rhythm of survival and little else. It was on a night choked with a cold, clinging mist that the line was crossed. The mark was a merchant from the upper tiers, a man whose girth spoke of a lifetime of plenty, his fingers glinting with rings that could feed the Warrens for a month. He was in the wrong place, seeking a darker pleasure than his gilded district could offer. Sayra and her makeshift crew, a handful of desperate souls whose names she never bothered to learn, had cornered him in a dead-end alley behind a tavern that reeked of sour mash. The plan was simple. Take the rings, the purse, and vanish. But the merchant fought. He was stronger than he looked, and fear lent him a brute strength. He backhanded one of the boys, Kellen, sending him crumpling against the wet cobblestones with a sickening crack. Something in Sayra snapped. It wasn't loyalty. Such a concept was as foreign to her as silk sheets. It was a deeper, more primal reaction, a challenge to her territory, her hunt. As the merchant turned, his face a mask of panicked fury, she didn't think. Her body moved with the lethal grace of a striking serpent. The rusty, notched blade she carried found its home not in his arm or his leg, but in the soft hollow of his throat. The world seemed to freeze. The merchant's eyes bulged, a wet, gurgling sound escaping his lips as he clutched at the hilt. The rich, coppery scent of blood bloomed in the air, overwhelming the stench of the alley. He sank to his knees, then toppled sideways, his life pooling around him in a dark, steaming slick. The others fled, their footsteps echoing into the night, leaving Sayra alone with the corpse and the terrible, final silence of her act. She was caught 3 days later, huddled in a stolen cloak, trying to sell one of the blood-caked rings. The city watch showed no mercy. The trial was a mockery, a swift formality for a Warren's rat who had the audacity to kill her betters. The sentence was death by hanging in the sunken square, a spectacle for the jeering masses. The morning of the execution dawned gray and unforgiving. The gallows stood like a skeletal hand against the bruised sky. The crowd roared, a single hungry entity. Sayra, her wrists bound, her face a mask of grime and defiance, was led up the rough-hewn steps. The coarse hemp of the noose was fitted around her neck. She did not close her eyes. She would meet the void with a snarl on her lips. But the void did not come. As the executioner moved to the lever, a figure emerged from the periphery, a man clad in robes of deepest gray that seemed to drink the feeble light. He moved with an unnerving silence, the crowd parting before him without a sound. He spoke a few quiet words to the magistrate, who paled and nodded vigorously. With a gesture, the guards cut Sayra down. She collapsed, choking onto the rough planks. The man in gray looked down at her. His face was ageless, sharp-featured, his eyes the color of a winter twilight. There was no pity in them, only a cold, assessing curiosity. "The rope claims only carrion, girl," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "You carry a different spark." a fire that can be tempered rather than extinguished. Your life is forfeit to the city. It now belongs to the Order of Shadows." She was dragged, half-conscious and bewildered, from the square. They took her not to another prison, but on a long, disorienting journey in a windowless carriage. When the door finally opened, she found herself in a place that defied her understanding. It was a fortress carved into the heart of a mist-shrouded mountain, a place of soaring, silent arches and chambers lit by cool, phosphorescent moss. This was the citadel of the Order. Her first days were a blur of confusion and rage. They stripped her of her filthy rags, scrubbed her raw, and clothed her in soft, dark garments. They fed her nourishing, flavorless food. They placed her in a cell that was more amongst quarters than a dungeon. Sparse, clean, with a pallet bed and a single slit of a window that showed only sky and stone. Her instructor in the first art was a man named Kalen. He was as solid and unyielding as the mountain itself, a master of the blade. He put a practice sword in her hand, felt alien clumsy. He corrected her stance, her grip, with a patience that infuriated her. "You fight like an animal," he stated, his voice flat. "All rage and no form. That is why you are here. To learn control. To make your violence an art, not an accident." She fought him, of course. She spat, she cursed, she tried to use the dirty tricks of the Warrens. He disarmed her every time, his movements economical, effortless. He was a wall against which her fury broke like a wave. After a particularly humiliating session where he had her disarmed and on her back in 3 heartbeats, she lay panting on the training mats, the cold stone seeping into her bones. "Why?" she snarled, the word tearing from her throat. "Why not just let me hang?" Kalen looked down at her, his expression unreadable. A tool left in the mud is merely a piece of rusted iron. But that same tool, taken by a master, polished, sharpened, and honed, can shape the world. The Order sees the potential for a fine tool in you, Sayra. The question is, will you allow yourself to be sharpened, or will you break against the grindstone? The word settled in her, colder than the stone. A tool. She was not being saved. She was being repurposed. And in the profound silence of the citadel, a new fear began to take root, one far more terrifying than the noose. The fear of being unmade, and remade into something she would not recognize. The wild thing inside her rattled its cage, sensing a new, more insidious kind of trap. The honing began in earnest. Kalen's lessons in the dueling yard were a study in brutal precision. He taught her not to swing a sword, but to place it, to let its weight and edge do the work. He forced her to practice the same thrust, the same parry 1,000 times, until her muscles screamed and her mind went numb with the repetition. The clumsy, heavy broadsword gave way to a pair of slender, perfectly balanced rapiers, and then finally to the weapons that felt like an extension of her own bones. A matched set of daggers, their blades blackened, their hilts worn smooth by generations of unseen hands. "Steel is a loud solution to a quiet problem," Kalen intoned as she practiced striking at a straw-stuffed dummy. "It is a final argument. Your first tools are your feet, your eyes, your silence." This was the domain of Mistress Anya, a woman who seemed to be composed of smoke and suggestion. She was the Order's spy mistress, and her lessons were held in the library, a vast circular room filled with scrolls and codices that held the secrets of empires, or in the practice chambers designed to mimic the opulent halls of the nobility. Here Sayra was taught to walk. Not the furtive slouch of the Warrens, but the gliding, soundless step of a courtier. She learned to pour wine without spilling a drop, to curtsy with the exact degree of deference required for a minor lord or a powerful duke, to speak the common tongue without the guttural accent of the slums. "They will not see you," Anya whispered, her voice a mere breath in the dim light of the practice chamber. "They will see a servant, a minor lady in waiting, a messenger. You are a ghost before you ever become a reaper. To be invisible is a power greater than any blade." It was the most difficult fight of her life, a war against every instinct she had ever cultivated. To be small, to be quiet, to be unseen. It felt like a violation of her very soul. She would spend hours simply standing in a corner of a room, learning to slow her breathing, to still the subtle rustle of her clothing, to become a part of the architecture. And then there was the third teacher, the one the others spoke of in hushed tones, Ilara, the keeper of whispers. Ilara was ancient, her face a web of fine lines, but her eyes held a light that was anything but feeble. She presided over a different kind of knowledge, one that skirted the edges of the world Sayra understood. It was not the roaring magic of storybooks, but something subtler, more insidious. In a chamber deep below the citadel, lit only by the glow of strange fungi and glass orbs, Ilara introduced her to the softer arts. She taught Sayra to identify poisons by the faint, bitter scent of monkshood or the sweet, cloying perfume of belladonna. She showed her how to distill them into tasteless, odorless tinctures that could mimic a slow fever or a sudden tragic seizure. And she spoke of other things, shadows that could be gathered and woven into a cloak that blurred the edges of one's form. A shadow cloak, she called it, an art that required immense concentration and a sliver of one's own vitality. She taught her an enchantment of silence, a subtle working of will that dampened sound around her footsteps, a spell that felt like holding her breath with her entire mind. "This is forbidden knowledge," Ilara warned, her gnarled fingers tracing the rim of a crystal vial. "The world fears what it does not understand. We use these arts not for glory but for necessity. They are threads in the great tapestry the Order weaves. Use them carelessly, and the tapestry will unravel, and you with it." Sayra learned. She had no choice. The alternative was not freedom but a cell deep within the mountain, or worse, being deemed a failed experiment and disposed of. She absorbed the lessons in combat, in stealth, in poison, and in shadow. She learned to read, to write, to discuss poetry and politics she cared nothing about. She was being stripped down layer by feral layer and rebuilt. The wild creature from the warrens was being caged, its instincts redirected, its rage cooled into a cold, calculating resolve. Her first true test was not an assassination but an extraction. A corrupt official in a distant coastal city was selling the Order's secrets. Her mission was to infiltrate his manor during a midsummer festival, find the ledgers containing his transactions, and replace them with forgeries. Dressed as a scribe's apprentice, her face half hidden by a hood, she moved through the bustling, drunken crowd. The sounds of laughter and music were a jarring counterpoint to the silence thrumming within her. She used the enchantment of silence, feeling a peculiar drain on her spirit as she slipped past guards who stood blinking, unaware of the faint shimmer in the air beside them. Inside the man's study, the scent of old parchment and beeswax filled her nostrils. Her heart, which had been a steady drum, began to falter. On the desk was a small painted portrait of the official with his family, a wife, 2 young children with round, innocent faces. The ghost of the merchant from the alley rose before her. The gurgle, the blood. Her hand trembled as she swapped the ledgers. This was different, she told herself. This was clean. No blood. And yet, she was stealing this man's life, orchestrating his ruin just as surely as her blade had ended another's. She was a different kind of weapon now, but a weapon nonetheless. She succeeded. She returned to the citadel with the genuine ledgers. Kaelin gave a curt nod of approval. Mistress Anya offered a rare, thin smile. But in the silence of her cell that night, Sayra felt no triumph. She stared at her hands, clean and smooth now, no longer caked with the grime of the Warrens. They were the hands of a killer, yes, but also the hands of a liar, a thief, a ghost. She had saved a piece of her soul by not taking a life, but she had bartered another piece away in the doing. She was becoming the tool they wanted, and the ghost of the girl from the Warrens wept soundlessly in the polished, silent dark. The success of the coastal extraction marked a turning point. Sayra was no longer a novice to be broken, but an asset to be deployed. The missions that followed were a descent into a gilded hell, each one chipping another sliver from the core of who she had been. She was sent to the opulent city of Sayra Lynn, a place of white spires and sun-drenched plazas, to poison a duke who threatened to plunge the region into war. She played the part of a visiting noblewoman from a distant land, her Warren's accent meticulously scrubbed from her tongue, her movements constrained by layers of silk and corsetry. The poisoning was a work of art. A single drop of a paralytic agent in his evening brandy, administered while fluttering her fan to mask the motion. He died in his sleep, his heart simply stopping. A tragic, natural-seeming end. As she stood amongst the mourners the next day, listening to his family's genuine, racking sobs, she felt the ghost within her shrink further, burying itself deep under the cold, professional calm. Another mission took her to the frozen northern holds, where she used a shadow cloak to slip into a chieftain's longhouse and plant evidence of treason, setting his own loyal thanes against him. She watched from the shadows as the man, who had laughed and feasted with his kin hours before, was dragged into the snow and beheaded. The conflict she had sparked would burn for months, securing the Order's influence in the region. She was a spark in a tinderbox, and the warmth of the Longhouse's great fire could not penetrate the chill that had settled in her bones. With each mission, her proficiency grew. Her movements became more fluid, her lies more effortless, her touch with the subtle arts more precise. She was the Order's perfect instrument. Yet with each success, a profound emptiness yawned wider inside her. The wild thing that had been Sayra was not gone, but it was starved, pacing a cage of discipline and duty, growing ever more desperate. It was after a particularly vile assignment, blackmailing a gentle-hearted priestess into betraying her temple's secrets, that the breaking point neared. The shame of corrupting something so inherently good festered in her. She requested, and was granted, a period of solitary reconnaissance in a quiet agricultural region on the outskirts of the verdant plains, far from the politics of cities and courts. It was meant to be a simple exercise in maintaining a cover identity for an extended period, a chance to let the ghost rest and the operative sharpen her observational skills. It was to be her undoing. She established herself as a traveling weaver from the south, seeking new patterns and dyes. The village of Oakhaven was a cluster of simple stone cottages with thatched roofs, nestled in a gentle valley where a slow, green river wound its way through fields of barley and wheat. The air smelled of sun-warmed earth, hay and wood smoke. The silence here was not the tense, watchful silence of the citadel, but a deep, resonant peace, broken only by the lowing of cattle and the distant song of a farmhand. And there was Kaelin. She saw him first across a market stall, his hands broad and capable, examining the quality of a hemp rope. He was not a handsome man in the way of the foppish courtier she had learned to mimic. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his hair the color of ripe wheat, and his shoulders were broad from a life of honest labor. But his eyes were the color of the summer sky over the fields, and they held a direct, uncomplicated kindness that struck her with the force of a physical blow. He noticed her looking and offered a small, shy smile. "New to Oakhaven?" he asked, his voice a warm, low rumble. Her training screamed at her. Maintain cover. Gather information. Remain detached. The ghost prepared to give a pleasant, non-committal answer. But the wild thing, the caged creature from the Warrens, stirred for the first time in years. "Yes," she said, and her voice, for the first time in memory, held no artifice. It was simply her own. "I am a weaver. Sayra." "I'm Kaelin," he replied. "My farm is just beyond the ridge. The one with the 2 great oaks." He pointed, and she followed his gaze to a gentle slope where 2 ancient trees stood as sentinels. Their encounters were small, innocent things. He helped her carry a bolt of cloth. He showed her where the best wildflowers grew for making dyes. He offered her a drink of cool water from his well one sweltering afternoon. With him there were no layers of deception. No hidden daggers, no poisons in her sleeve. There was only the sun on her face, the rich earth beneath her feet, and the simple, solid presence of a man who knew nothing of shadows. One evening, he invited her to see the farm. She walked with him along a dirt path, the scent of thyme and damp soil rising with every step. The farmhouse was small and sturdy, smoke curling from its chimney. Chickens scratched in the yard, and an old placid hound thumped its tail in the dust. From the ridge, the view stretched out for miles, a patchwork of green and gold fields under a vast painted sky. "It's not much," Kaelin said, a little self-consciously, "but it's home. It's real." Sayra stood beside him, the wind tugging at her simple woolen dress. She looked at his profile, at the honest weariness and contentment there. She looked at the land, at the simple, profound truth of it. This was a life, a whole, complete life, built on growth and nurture, not on death and secrets. The gilded cages of courts, the silent halls of the citadel, the blood-soaked alleys of her past, they all seemed like a fever dream in this clear evening light. A tear, hot and entirely unbidden, traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but he had seen. "Sayra?" he asked, his voice full of a concern so genuine it felt like a blade in her heart. "It's beautiful," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. And in that moment she wasn't the assassin, the spy, the ghost. She was just a woman standing in a field, her soul laid bare by a simple kindness she had never known she craved. The cage door for the first time seemed to have a lock she could see, and the wild thing inside her pressed against it, not with rage but with a desperate, aching hope. The days in Oakhaven stretched, each one a balm on a wound she had long forgotten she possessed. Sayra's cover, the traveling weaver, became less of a disguise and more of a sanctuary. She rented a small, sunlit room above the village chandler, its window overlooking a herb garden. In the mornings she would sit with a lap loom, her fingers, so adept at wielding daggers and mixing poisons, now clumsily learning the patient rhythm of the shuttle and the warp. The coarse, undyed wool was a tangible, honest thing. It held no secrets, demanded no lies. Her time with Kaelin was a study in a life she had never dared imagine. He taught her the names of the constellations that blazed in the unsullied night sky: the plowman, the starry river, the shepherd's crook. He showed her how to tell the weather by the smell of the wind and the ache in his bad knee. He shared simple meals of dark bread, sharp cheese, and stew made from his own vegetables, eaten on a rough-hewn table outside his door as the sun set. One afternoon, a sudden violent summer storm swept down from the mountains. Sayra was caught in his barn, seeking shelter as the sky tore open and rain lashed against the timber walls. The air inside was thick and warm, smelling of hay, horse, and wet earth. They stood in the doorway, watching the torrential downpour, the world outside reduced to a gray roaring veil. Kaylin stood close, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. The simple proximity sent a jolt through her system far more terrifying than any combat drill. It was not the calculated flirtation of the court, nor the predatory closeness of the Warrens. This was different. This was warmth. "It'll pass," he said, his voice a quiet rumble beneath the drumming rain. "It always does. The fields will be better for it." Sayra said nothing. She was acutely aware of the weight of the throwing knife strapped to her thigh, hidden beneath her skirts. A tool of death, resting mere inches from a man whose hands knew only how to create, to nurture. The contradiction was a physical pain. The ghost of her training whispered of vulnerability, of compromised security. But the wild, hopeful thing in her chest beat back the whispers, entranced by the scent of rain and the solid, peaceful presence beside her. When the storm abated to a gentle drizzle, leaving the world washed clean and glittering, he turned to her. Water droplets clung to his weak-colored hair. His gaze was soft, searching. "You're a mystery, Sayra the Weaver," he murmured. "You have shadows in your eyes that don't belong to a woman who works with colored thread." Her breath hitched. The operative in her froze, assessing the threat, calculating a dozen lies. But the woman, the real woman buried under layers of imposed identity, could only look back, her defenses in ruins. He didn't press. He simply reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray, damp lock of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric. It was not a claim, not a demand. It was a question. It was an offering. A sob welled up in her throat, so sudden and violent it shocked her. She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears that now fell freely, mingling with the rain on her skin. She began, but the words wouldn't come. How could they? How could she tell him that the shadows he saw were real? That they were made of blood and silence and forbidden magic? That she was a monster he was inviting into his home? "You don't have to say anything," Kaylin said, his hand dropping back to his side, his kindness a torment. "Everyone carries their own weather with them." His acceptance was the final shattering blow. In that moment, the carefully constructed edifice of the Order's assassin crumbled. The dual life she had been leading, the delicate balance between the ghost and the woman, became unbearable. The thought of leaving this valley, of returning to the cold, silent citadel, of receiving another mission that would stain her soul further, was a fate worse than the hangman's noose. That night, back in her small room, she did not sleep. She stood at the window, watching the moon silver the wet tiles of the village roofs. She could feel the two paths before her, stark and irreconcilable. One led back to the Shadow Order, to a life of purpose-built emptiness, of being a finely honed tool in a game she did not control. It was a path of certain survival, of a cold, sterile power. The other path led to Kaylin, to the scent of rain on dry earth, to the weight of an honest day's labor, to the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of a touch that asked for nothing. It was a path of immense risk, of flight, of becoming the hunted. It was a path that could lead to his death as easily as her own. She looked at her hands in the moonlight. They were no longer the filthy claws of a warren's rat, nor the perfectly steady instruments of an assassin. They were just hands, a woman's hands, and they ached to hold something other than a blade. They ached to feel the sun-warmed wood of a plow, the rough wool of a sheep, the solid, work-worn strength of Kalen's own. The choice, when it came, was not a shout of defiance, but a quiet, desperate exhale in the dark. She could not go back. The cage was open. The wild thing was fleeing, not with a snarl, but with a prayer on its breath, running towards the only light it had ever seen, even if that light meant casting the longest shadow of all. The decision once made did not bring peace, but a new, more potent kind of terror. Every moment in Oakhaven now felt stolen, precious, and fragile. The scent of baking bread from the village oven was a memory she was already mourning. The sound of Kalen's laugh was a melody she tried to sear into her soul. She moved through the sun-dappled days with the grim awareness of a prisoner counting down the final hours before dawn. Her training, that deeply ingrained second nature, became her enemy. She found herself automatically noting the patterns of the village watch, their routes, their blind spots, the times they lingered for a gossip. She catalogued the horses in the stable, assessing their speed and stamina for a flight she now desperately planned. She watched the roads, her heart leaping into her throat at the sight of any unfamiliar traveler, fearing the gray robes of the order had already come for her. She knew she could not simply vanish. The order would not rest. A tool did not simply walk away. It was either useful or it was broken. To disappear would be to sign not only her own death warrant, but likely Kalen's as well. They would use him as leverage, a hook to drag the wayward asset back into the fold. The thought of his kind eyes clouded with fear and betrayal because of her was a physical agony. She had to sever the tie, but in a way that would make the order believe the tool was shattered beyond repair or use. She had to die. Not Sayra the Weaver, but the operative known only as Wraith within the Order's records, had to perish in a manner so conclusive that they would close her file forever. An idea, dark and desperate, began to form in the quiet of her mind. It was a gamble that relied on the Order's own methods and their meticulous nature. It required one last, perfect performance. She began her preparations with a cold, detached focus that felt like slipping back into a familiar, suffocating skin. She spent a day in the woods, gathering specific fungi and herbs that Alara had taught her to identify. In the secrecy of her room, with the moon as her only witness, she used a small traveling mortar and pestle to grind them into a fine powder. This was not a poison, but the base for a potent incendiary agent, one that burned with an unnatural white-hot heat and left little but ash in its wake. Next came the most painful part. She sat at her small loom, her fingers trembling as she wove. But she was not weaving a pattern. She was creating a replica of the simple, dark tunic and trousers she had been given for her physical training at the Citadel, the closest thing the Wraith had to a uniform. She stuffed the garment with straw and rags, fashioning a crude human-shaped effigy. Into its chest, she sewed a small leather-wrapped packet containing the incendiary powder and a slow-burning chemical fuse she concocted from materials bought in separate, innocuous transactions across the county. Her plan was a macabre piece of theater. She would travel to the bustling trade city of Telmar, a place with enough chaos and transient population to provide cover. There, She would rent a room in a flimsy, wooden inn in the docks district. The effigy, the stand-in for the wraith, would be placed inside. She would light the fuse and flee. The resulting fire would be fierce and complete, burning hot enough to consume bone and leave behind only a charred, unidentifiable form clad in the remnants of an order-issue garment. The order spies would report the death of their operative in a tragic, mundane accident. She chose a market day to say goodbye to Kaelin, when the village was busy and public. The pain of it was a sharp, clean wound. He met her by the well, his smile as open as the sky. "I have to leave, Kaelin," she said, her voice carefully neutral, the ghost firmly in control to keep the woman from shattering. My family. There is trouble. I must return south." His face fell, the light in his summer sky eyes dimming. "Trouble? Is there anything I can do? I could come with you." "No." The word came out too sharp, too desperate. She forced a softer tone. "No. It is a family matter. It is something I must do alone." He looked at her, his gaze seeing too much as it always did. "Will you come back?" he asked, and the hope in his voice was a knife twisting in her gut. The lie tasted like ash on her tongue. "I do not know," she whispered, which was the closest she could come to the truth. "This life here, it has meant more to me than I can say." He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the cold stone of the well. His touch was warm, solid, real, a final perfect anchor she was about to sever. "Then know that you have a home here, Sayra," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whenever your path leads you back." She could not speak. She only nodded, her vision blurring, and then she turned and walked away, each step feeling like walking on shards of glass. She did not look back. She could not. If she saw his face one more time, her resolve would crumble to dust. She left Oakhaven as she had arrived, a solitary figure on the road. But now, a piece of her soul remained behind, nestled in the green valley between the two great oaks. The ghost was fleeing, not towards a new life, but towards a carefully orchestrated death. The unraveling had begun, and the thread she pulled would either lead to freedom or snuff out the last, flickering light in her world. The weight of the incendiary packet in her pack felt heavier than any blade, a grim promise of a pyre she herself would light. The city of Telmar was a cacophony of salt-crusted wood, shouting merchants, and the groaning of ships in their berths. It was a place of endings and beginnings, where identities were shed as easily as a sailor's pay. For Sayra, it was to be the stage for her final performance. She found the perfect venue. The Salty Mermaid, a 3-story inn leaning precariously over the filthy water of the harbor. It was built of dry, ancient timber, crowded with patrons who asked no questions and remembered no faces. She paid for a top-floor room with a week's coin, telling the disinterested innkeeper she was a scribe catching a ship on the morning tide. The room was a cramped, airless box smelling of mildew and old fish. It would burn beautifully. Night fell, cloaking the city in a mist that coiled in from the sea. The sounds of the docks were a distant, muffled roar. Sayra worked with a methodical calm that belied the storm raging within her. She placed the straw effigy on the narrow cot, arranging it in a repose that suggested sleep. Her hands were steady as she carefully inserted the fused incendiary packet into the stuffed chest. This was it, the final irrevocable cut. But as her fingers brushed against the rough-spun tunic of the effigy, a wave of revulsion so powerful it near brought her to her knees washed over her. This was not just a strategic withdrawal. This was a desecration. She was not just killing the wraith. She was erasing the last tenuous link to the citadel, to the only identity she had known for years. She was murdering a part of herself, and the violence of the act, even staged, felt like a dark echo of the merchant in the alley. It was a final bloody offering on the altar of her freedom, a sound soft as a sigh, yet deafening in the trained silence of her senses, froze her blood. It was the faintest scrape of a boot on the hallway floorboards outside her door. Not the heavy, drunken tread of a sailor. This was the sound of deliberate, weight-shifted movement. The sound of a predator. The order. They were here. How? Had they been watching her since Oak Haven? Had her preparations been discovered? It didn't matter. The theater of the fire was now a trap. Her mind, honed by years of survival, clicked into a cold, hyper-aware state. The ghost and the woman fused into a single desperate entity. She blew out the single candle, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint glow from the harbor lights filtering through the grimy window. She unsheathed her blackened daggers, the familiar weight a grim comfort in her hands. The door did not burst open. Instead, there was a soft click as a lockpick found its mark. The door swung inward silently, and a figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. He was tall, clad in the familiar light-absorbing gray of the order. It was Kalen. His eyes, accustomed to the dark, found her immediately in the corner. There was no surprise in them, only a profound, weary disappointment. "The tool believes it can think for itself," he said, his voice low and flat in the small room. "A dangerous illusion, Sayra. You were our finest. Do not make me break you." "I am already broken," she whispered, the words tasting like truth. "I am putting the pieces back together in a different shape." "There is only one shape for you," he replied, and he took a step into the room, his own short sword appearing in his hand as if by magic. "The shape we gave you. Come quietly. The citadel is merciful to those who repent." Mercy. The word was a mockery. Their mercy was a lifetime of servitude in the shadows. Her soul slowly eroded to nothing. The life with Kalen, the scent of rain, the feel of sun-warmed earth, it all flashed before her, not as a memory, but as a battle standard. "No," she said. It was not a shout, but a statement. A final declaration of self. He moved. It was the same blinding economical speed she had faced 100 times in the training yard. But she was no longer a novice. She was the wraith. She met his charge not with a block, but with a fluid evasion, her body twisting as one dagger deflected his thrust while the other sought the gap in his defense. Steel rang against steel, a sharp, discordant chime in the dark. This was not a duel. It was a savage, silent ballet of survival. He was stronger, more experienced. But she had something he did not, everything to lose. She fought with the desperate fury of the Warrens, tempered by the lethal precision of the order. She used the room's confines to her advantage, overturning the small table, using the cot as a barrier. He was a force of nature, relentless and powerful, but she was a ghost, a wisp of smoke he could not quite grasp. In a moment of locked blades, his face inches from hers, he grunted. "He is a farmer, Sayra. A simple man. You would drag our shadow into his son? You would get him killed for a fantasy." His words were a poison more potent than any in Alara's collection. They found the chink in her armor, the fear that had haunted her every moment in Oak Haven. Her resolve wavered for a fraction of a second. It was enough. His boot swept her legs out from under her. She fell hard, her head cracking against the floorboards. Dazed, she saw his sword rise for a final disabling strike. Instinct took over. Her hand, seemingly of its own volition, shot out not with a blade, but towards the cot. Her fingers closed around the fused packet on the effigy's chest. With a final defiant surge of will, she ripped it free and threw it, not at Kaelin, but at the room's dry wooden wall. There was a brilliant, silent flash, and then a roar as the white-hot fire consumed the wall in an instant. The heat was immense, a physical force that shoved them both back. Kaelin staggered, his face a mask of shock and sudden alarm as the flames, hungry and unnatural, began to devour the room. This was her chance. This was the chaos she needed. Scrambling to her feet, she didn't look back. She launched herself through the burning doorway, past a stunned Kaelin, and into the smoky hallway. Shouts of alarm began to echo through the inn as the fire spread with terrifying speed. She didn't descend the stairs. She ran to the end of the hall and smashed through the window, shards of glass and burning wood raining down around her as she dropped into the cold, dark waters of the harbor below. The shock of the water was a baptism. She plunged deep, the sounds of the inferno becoming a muted roar. She kicked away from the sinking debris, swimming with powerful, desperate strokes under the docks, a creature of shadow and water fleeing the pyre of her own making. She surfaced in the labyrinth of pilings, gasping for air. Behind her, the salty mermaid was a blazing torch against the night, its reflection dancing on the black water. They would find a body in the ashes, she was sure of it. The effigy, the remnants of the tunic, it would be enough. The wraith was dead. But Sayra was alive. Soaked, shivering, and utterly alone, she pulled herself onto a deserted, slime-slick jetty. The city bells began to clang, calling for water brigades. The world was chaos and fire. She had no plan, no supplies, only the daggers at her hips and the clothes on her back. She looked back once at the burning inn, a funeral pyre for her old life. Then she turned and melted into the twisting, mist-choked alleys of Telmar, a ghost in the rain. She was a question mark, a story without an ending. Did she run towards the green valley and the man with eyes the color of a summer sky, knowing she might be leading the shadows to his door? Or did she vanish into the vast, unknown world, a solitary wraith forever looking over her shoulder, the weight of her past a chain she could never break? The night gave no answer. It simply swallowed her, leaving only the whisper of the rain and the fading echo of the fire, a poetic, bittersweet uncertainty hanging in the damp air. Her fate was her own now, a terrifying and utterly beautiful freedom. And so the shadows close around Sayra's path, leaving her fate to the whispers of the wind and the turns of your own imagination. If her journey through the light and the dark has captivated you, if the echoes of Varaden's streets and the silence of the citadel still linger in your mind, then you have been a part of this story with me. These tales are woven from silence, and it is in your listening that they find their life. To ensure you never miss a step into another world, be sure to follow or subscribe to this channel. Your support is the magic that allows these narratives to unfold. Did Sayra's struggle between her duty and her desire resonate with you? Were there moments that held you breathless, or an ending that left you yearning for more? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I am eager to read them. What do you believe awaits her in the mist? Your theories are a compass pointing to new stories. And if you wish to help this story find its way to other listeners, to fellow dreamers who seek a touch of darkness and a glimmer of romance, a like, a share, or a review would be a kindness beyond measure. Thank you for walking this shadowed path. until the next tale begins, in the quiet between heartbeats.